Hey readers, I'm Danny.
And I'm Leandra, and we are not reading for content.
This is a monthly book club podcast dedicated to reading in depth and leaving no plot point unturned. Each month, we read one book over the course of 3 episodes, basically reading 1/3 of the book at a time. Feel free to listen along, or better yet, read the book with us. Our first season of the book club has the theme of genre blends. A list of books and the club schedule will be in the description.
Hey, bookish friends! Welcome to another episode of Not Reading for Content. Today, we are talking about the second third of Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham. We have read another 5 chapters. We started with Rendezvous, and we read through the chapter of Tynsham. Just a reminder, we are a fully spoilered podcast, so if you haven't reached this point, stop here. Do not pass go until you've actually read that section, and then come back and chat with us a little bit more. But before we get into this discussion, as always, we do have a bookish bite of the week, and Danny has that for us. So, Danny, what is the bookish bite?
Well, I thought this week that maybe we could discuss our preference in timelines. So, are we people who would like consistent timelines? Do we like it to jump around? Do we not care? What are we looking for in books? What do you think?
Ooh, I know. How to start this? Well, I can say what I like. You know me, Danny. I really like a time-sensitive timeline. It impacts the plot, and we know the kind of deadline that the characters or the world might have. I'm someone who actually does enjoy a dual timeline when it's done well. The issue that comes with that, especially if it's more than a dual timeline, maybe we're talking about 3, 4, is the amount of emphasis on each timeline. How well developed is it? Do I care about both timelines equally? But when we're
Yeah.
dealing with one single timeline, I suppose that, I don't know, I get worried when it lasts a significant amount of time. If I'm following a person throughout their entire life, if I'm following multiple generations of people, I love it. But I also get worried that I have to put more trust in an author than if we're dealing with, one season, like 3 months, or even a timeline that takes, a couple weeks, a week, something to that effect. What I found is the handful of books that immediately come to mind with a timeline are actually ones that take place over 24 hours. I've got 2 titles in mind, actually. We've got The Secret Place by Tana French. That one's dual timeline. I will say only one of the timelines takes place over 24 hours. The other one takes place over, I think, the course of a year. Meanwhile, another title I'm thinking of is Deadline at Dawn. And that one actually only takes place over maybe like 6, 7 hours because it opens just before midnight. And then the characters have to do a few activities, clear someone for murder, the casual things, before they make it to a bus. And the bus leaves the city, I think at like 6:15 a.m. And they're like, we have to get all this done so we can escape New York City, basically. And so those ones, I will say, I love the chase of it. I love how we are basically with these characters as much as we can for that very brief amount of time. So if I have to say, I probably like the energy of a shorter timeline, but I don't know if I have a huge preference. I just want it done well. I just want it done well.
I can kind of parallel that. If it's done well, I think I'm not picky, but which I think a lot of people would say that
Right.
probably. I have definitely like as you were talking, I'm sitting there thinking of like all these books and all of them are like bad examples. So
Oh
you were
no.
talking about like liking a timeline that you have a limited timeline. And the
Mm,
most recent book I read that had that was The Last Murder at the End of the World, which I ended up
mm,
not enjoying. But the premise just intrigues me. And I think that I'm probably harsher on not rush timeline, but like a limited timeline because I want it to pay off. I want the suspense to build to something that I am happy with. So I do think some of the stories that I've had that have had that, I'm a little bit harsher with my rating if they don't satisfy at the end.
I think
So
we might disagree on that. I think I'm harsher on longer timelines because I'm like, you're dealing with an entire person's life. You better choose the right moments. You better make sure I'm with you during the right moments, because if not, why are we summarizing?
and
Not that I get what you're talking about, though. I totally get it.
yeah, and I do think that that probably goes back to me enjoying chunkier reads. I like to live with the characters in these really mundane moments. Um, but I understand what you're saying too, though. You're like, if I don't want to live through a moment if it literally has no meaning. And as far as dual timeline goes, I do like if there's a book to give you an example of a book that I didn't enjoy as much. I didn't hate it, but it was just it kind of let me down at the end was The Keeper of Enchanted Rooms, and there was a dual timeline there, and the way that they ended up meeting up, the timelines ended up meeting up, I just thought was very disappointing. One of the timelines felt very much weaker than the other. And it was sad because to me, it was the more interesting of the timelines and ended up just kind of falling flat. And so I do like a dual timeline. I like to be able to guess like where are things happening and why are we getting this information now. I really enjoy the mystery of that.
Mhm.
But that's something too, if one of them intrigues me more than the other, it's gonna be hard for me to continue reading.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think you actually hit the nail on the head in this idea where it probably is easier to pinpoint books with timelines that have affected us because I think the key to a good timeline is almost that you don't notice it.
Yeah,
You're not aware of this, time passing in a clunky way or in a jarring way, or
right.
that there's inconsistencies. You would notice a worse timeline than you would with a good one, because I'm also thinking of, and not to say that this is a terrible book, I promise it's not. And actually, you and I read this with our friend Nell. It was How to Solve Your Own Murder. I remember not being super invested in the past timeline. And I think that was my biggest issue with the book, among a few other things that I just wasn't as intrigued by. I think I ended up giving that book 3 or 3.5 stars. So I didn't hate it, but I kept harping on feeling as though the past timeline just, I wasn't clicking with the characters. I didn't really understand their motivations. And every time we got to that past timeline, I was thinking, oh gosh, okay, now we got to get through a chapter or two of here before we can get back to the modern day timeline. And so it is interesting when those titles pop up to you because it's probably because you did have an issue with it, and that's why it's harder for us to be like, who does this well? Those are our like unsung heroes, I think.
Yeah. And actually, so this I don't know if I would say this is maybe it's a broken timeline or if it's really just a change in POV. Which connects to timelines because you were saying like jumping to a person's timeline or a past timeline that maybe you're not as interested in, and then you are just kind of disappointed that you have to be along with these pages until you can get back to the part that you're interested in. And I find that in some POVs as well, like when you jump POVs and you're like, oh, I really don't
Mhm.
like this person's point of view. And so, yeah, I think that connects to that as well. Like you don't
Mhm.
ever want to get to a part in a book where you just kind of feel like it's a slog. So any type of timeline that you are less intrigued by or that you're frustrated with or feel that it's not developed is going to disrupt your enjoyment.
Oh, 100%. And the reason why we are discussing timelines today is because we did notice some interesting timeline changes as far as pace by our author. And keeping in mind, we were often comparing timelines from like kind of short books versus longer books because we assume a shorter book will take a shorter amount of time and a longer book likely should, span a longer timeline for our main characters. Whereas we're dealing with a very short sci-fi horror, and the timeline pacing, I suppose maybe is the right way to say it, is different in this second section than it is in the first one, and we can unpack that. But first, it is important to provide a little bit of a synopsis, a little bit of a premise for how this second section started out. And I am taking that role on today, so everyone buckle up. We're going to see what comes out of my mouth. When we closed the first section of our first episode covering, the reading of this book, our two main characters included Bill and Jocelyn. Our main POV, our first person POV, the eyes that we're seeing through the world is Bill. And so from him and Jocelyn's perspective, they are safe for now in this apartment, and their plan is to leave the city ASAP. They want to gather supplies and get out to the country, get away from, unfortunately, what is likely going to be many bodies that are rotting, as well as other dangers, other people. We understand why they want to leave. But first and foremost, before they decide to leave, they're going to check out that strange beam of light that was coming off from in the distance. And they discover that it is coming from a university tower So they go to the university, find that it is gated, that it's pretty much a compound in which the seeing people, at least a handful of them, have gathered, as well as an addition of, some blind people within the population, and they are fortifying. They're very particular about who's allowed to come in. And as soon as you enter this compound, you are put to the work, because the plan is to gather as much supplies as possible, similar to what Bill and Jocelyn had in mind for themselves. And again, have a plan and, in essence, leave the city behind. And when they arrive, they're immediately put to work. They help, with the effort. And that night, there was this major meeting. And we have, a plan put into motion, suggested. And those who are quote unquote in charge say, you can, follow the plan that we have, follow our rules for this new kind of society that we're planning on building, or you can leave. This is your choice, but we are leaving tomorrow morning. And that night, things happen, is what I'll say. Our main characters end up kind of being projected into a completely different scenario than they anticipated. Specifically, Bill discovers that he is in, kind of the crosshairs of a predicament that he doesn't really like, he doesn't know how to get out of. And we can, move forward with the discussion from there. But also, Danny, how did you feel about this section? How are you feeling about the book? And then we can get, plot point by plot point.
I have to say that I was less enamored with today's pages.
Mm-hmm.
I don't hate it by any means. Like I'm not saying that this completely threw me off of the book and, I'm rating it a 1 star or whatever. I'm not saying that, but I think that, in my opinion, this section was less intentional than the first
Mm-hmm.
section. I felt very much like we kind of ruminated, I guess, is that the word, on the nuances of what was happening in the first page. Sorry, my cat is joining us.
Hello, Andy.
And that doesn't really happen with
Andy's a big boy. Just so everybody knows, you can't see this.
That doesn't really happen with these pages, and so I was kind of disappointed with that. I feel like some things felt a bit rushed, which leans into us talking about the timeline. I also I think I felt that there was a couple of things that happened that I just don't. It leans into the unbelievableness again, as far as what some people's opinions on certain things are, and we can get into that. But yeah, I do think that some of what happens in today's pages did lead to some really interesting views on what would happen in this instance, how people would deal with it, differences of opinions, people being forced into situations they don't expect. Like, I do think that there's some really important conversations that can be had. I wish that things were a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
What about you?
I agree. To first and foremost, we have to compare, right? We've got to compare it to the first section, and this one was far more of a slog for me. I think it took me longer to get through the pages and to kind of pinpoint areas of discussion that I would want to even bring up, to be honest, versus in our first episode, there were so many minute episodes, I guess we can call it, two scenes in which Bill is interacting with different characters. And there were lines that I would have wanted to underline. I wanted to unpack how interesting the themes were, the commentary, the reactions, the eeriness, and us putting ourselves in Bill's shoes. Whereas this, section of chapters, I was thinking, I don't know if one, I definitely don't want to be here. Two, I didn't find myself as gripped. In the most recent 5 chapters, we have spanned 10 days, give or take. Whereas in the first 5 chapters, we were there for 1 day. And that's a drastic difference. Even if this was, really well done, we were captivated, it would still be kind of jarring to feel as though we are with this character for an entire day. We're breaking up, not even honestly, not even 24 hours. We were with him for maybe 12, because he wakes up and then we are with him and Jocelyn when they go to bed in the apartment that they found. So it is a very jarring separation. And I just think less important things happen. He's kind of jostled around. I know that I'm saying jostled and Jocelyn. Just keep up with us, friends. We're doing our best. And I felt like it was scattered. I do agree with you. It felt less planned. It felt as though he probably, as an author, had the first section so well formulated in his mind and then didn't really know what these characters would do next, especially when their initial plan on that night was to actually go off and, take care of themselves. The two of them plan to maybe stay in the city one more night and then leave. And that plan is completely thrown out the window. They never talk about it again. As soon as they come upon, this university tower and realize that's where the light's coming from. And they just kind of accept that they're in this group now. I kind of wanted there to be this question of, should we join this group of people? Is that smart, or are we better on our own? I felt as though they were going with the motions way too quickly and just accepting every new scenario they're in, specifically Bill, because we lose Jocelyn, obviously, at some point. And I agree with the questioning of some of these discussions. One, I didn't like some of these discussions. I didn't like the connotations that came with them. And I don't like this character Coker, which we can get to him in due time. So we'll put a pin in it. I get bad vibes from him. I don't know if he's someone that we can really, put our faith in. But yeah, I was very shocked by Jocelyn too, actually.
Yeah.
So they join this compound. They do a bunch of scavenging, finding, stuff. Everyone looks at him weird, Bill weird, for like wanting to get Triffid, like artillery, and I'm just like, dude, what are you talking about? Why is everyone so shocked? These freaking plants are killing people left and right. Maybe they haven't seen it, but I fully believe that everyone should be on their guard about them. So everyone's really laissez-faire. And then by the time the big meeting comes, there are some declarations that obviously from a modern perspective too, we're coming from, the perspective of two women in 2025. But I absolutely hated what these men, in essence, were saying that the new society would be, run by them. What did you think about it, Danny? And what were some of these suggestions that these men had?
So we have the meeting the night that they come to the university, and we have several speakers who are coming up and discussing how this community is going to work. And essentially, we see as the readers, as Bill is walking in, that there are 100, I think, it was described as like 100 women sitting in this space that were waiting for this speech to be given. And Bill notices that all of them are blind. And as soon as that happened, I was like, okay, I know what's happening. Like, I know where this is going to go. And essentially, the men who go up and speak say that in this new community that they're going to create, men are going to work, women are going to have babies. Blind women are acceptable because they can help reproduce. Blind men are not acceptable because men's purpose is to work. And they even go as far as to say at one point that babies are more important than husbands, because their job at this point in time is to reproduce and make sure that the human civilization continues. So I had issue with that, from a modern perspective. Like, in general, I don't want to be told that I have to have children to begin with. I do, from this perspective, as civilization ending, I understand that those conversations would be had. Do I believe that they would be had a week after the apocalypse happens? No.
Not even a week. Remember, it's
Right.
the next day. It's literally
Oh,
the next
true.
day it happened. So within 24 hours, because the timeline opens, he wakes up. Oh, suddenly, the entire Earth has collapsed. Civilization has collapsed, and then they go to bed, wake up the next day, go to this, university compound. That night, they've got the meeting.
Yeah.
It's literally within like not even 48 hours do they have this discussion where they're like, how are we going to reproduce and continue the human race? And I'm just thinking, that would not be the main focus right now.
And I understand that that would happen eventually, so I do think that that would have been completely believable to have in this book somewhere if we had a longer timeline, but yeah, it to happen on the 2nd day is just like, how about we talk about how to get out of the city, how to be safe, how to make food and water? Like, can we not talk about the basics before we start having babies? Because to me, all I was thinking about is, you want me to be pregnant when we don't know how I'm gonna eat? Like, can we figure out that stuff first? And then and we can come back to that if you have more to say, but I also just wanna say I was really mad about how Josala reacted to the whole thing. Bill says, "I would like," which I think is weird to say as well, on the 2nd day, you know someone. Um, "I would like if we have chil or if you have children, I would like them to be mine." And so he is essentially, like, proposing, like, a traditional relationship with her, and she is very excited about it, but she's like, "Only if you also bed 2 blind women." Because she, like, sets up this scenario in her head that we have way more women, because I think we have 100 blind women plus some seeing women, and 35 men who can see, I think was the number that was given, and so she's like, "Yeah, for every if you're gonna marry or be with someone who is seeing, then you should also be with some people who are blind." And Bill is the one who's taken back by it and is like, "What? This is not right." And there's like a discussion of traditional values and all that as well. But the fact that it came from Josala and she was just completely okay with it. I mean, it was almost like someone who had been like ingrained in a cult. That's what it sounded like to me. Her conversation with him was she was so in on their plan, and I'm like, I just that's not believable to me that someone coming from a not a modern society, but, like, in their day, someone who has a certain perspective on life just switching on a dime. I don't find that believable.
I completely agree, especially when we know what we know about Josala. The fact that she is known by society before it collapses as the woman who wrote a book called Sex is My Adventure. She is, in essence, this very progressive person. And, she may have actually traditional values, but she's not afraid to, push the boundaries. She parties, she's young, she, ventures off from her privileged life to live, I think, in an apartment with her friends and then realizes, I kind of need to make money. And so she writes this book. And because it's so successful, she's like, I could move home and prove to them that I don't even need their money and everything's fine. So I feel as though her personality and what we know she's done, at least as far as, not being afraid to push back against society values and, happily make money off of this book, even though it gets tired, people immediately judging her. Her to, yeah, flip the switch and say, I am happy to immediately give you babies and also be part of what's in essence polygamy. I'm happy to have you also bed these other 2 women. We're not going to ask if they want any of this. We're just going to assume that we're going to do this. And I'm pretty sure Bill even contemplates and says, this is reminding me of Brigham Young. Like, are we going to, fall back into, at one point, it is not, acceptable in modern times for those who follow the LDS, faith. But at one point it was, something that was expected. And so I feel as though we do have a situation in which the author kind of let his imagination run away with him. We also get this in literature where even Sherlock Holmes has to deal with a mystery that takes us all the way back to, the American Wild West and references LDS members who are, also enforcing polygamy. It's called A Study in Scarlet, and it's not a good novella. I'm not going to lie. So I've seen this before, where a British author just throws in Mormonism, and again, not to say that they didn't at one point practice it, but they don't nowadays. So we can move past it. And yeah, the fact that they're immediately saying this, I think, is crazy. I agree with you. They would focus on the basics, because the question is, can we even take care of each other enough in the next, year, let alone feed babies after that? Like, there's so many, questions where it doesn't make any sense. And it's clear to me that this was written by a man who is very comfortably living in society, who doesn't actually have to contemplate what happens if we collapse and what's the first thing we should care about. So that is, to be expected, to be honest. I wouldn't have batted an eye, if even a modern man thinks, let's first consider how we're going to progress the human race. It's like, I would like to actually first consider how I'm going to, make sure my life is prolonged, let alone prolonging the human race. Because we've got some bigger fish to fry, my friend. I don't know if you realize this. I don't know if you've looked outside and seen that society is no longer, but okay. And naturally, we do have, people who do dissent, who say, no, this isn't right. Those who argue against it are doing it for religious reasons, saying that it's against God to, practice anything beyond monogamy. And they have a bit of a back and forth. And there's pretty much just an ultimatum. Okay, you don't have to agree with us. That means we're not taking you with us. And so case closed, everyone goes to bed, and they say, we are leaving, tomorrow morning. That's it. And then, of course, we do end up getting this dramatic scene where, Bill wakes up, there's smoke everywhere, people are freaking out, there's a fire, supposedly. And as he's scrambling to go figure out the source of this fire, and obviously to, what is it called? to put it out, he ends up getting knocked out in some way and comes to tied with wire to a bed. And we realize that there has been a coup at the university, and a different plan is being put into place. Is this a good plan either? No. No one has a good plan in this world, I think. I would argue that this one wasn't much better either, to be honest.
No, I thought it was so strange. So the plan is that we're going to kidnap people who are seeing and put them in charge, kind of a group of people who can't see by chaining them to two brawlers, I suppose, that can't see, so they can't run away, and displacing them at random locations within the city and telling them to take care of their people. I don't understand how they thought that was going to work out. I guess you're taking people who are like not willingly, and he even compares it at one point in time when Bill starts taking care of these people and helping them do things, and he likens it to putting a baby in someone's arms, like letting me hold the baby so I can see, it's a living, breathing being, and so I should take care of it. And while I appreciate the like his introspection on the fact that these are living people that he was abandoning, and him having this question of whether or not he should take care of them, but it's cheapened by the fact that he was forced to do it. And so, yeah, I was not really a fan of Coker's plan to take care of people, and it very clearly didn't work. I also kind of think there were moments in time, and it got a little better as we progressed within the 6 days that he ended up being with them, but it kind of made blind people feel like they were incompetent and not able to grow. And I understand, like, if I, woke up tomorrow and was blind, it would take me a minute to adapt for sure. Like, I'm not saying that that wouldn't be a struggle, but he mentions that when he leaves certain people at his home base, that they're essentially just doing nothing. And I'm like, you're telling me that people who literally have nothing to do all day, you can't give them some type of a task that you could teach them to do and leave them to it? Like, they're not babies. Like, they are intelligent human beings. They just have a disability at this point, and you have to show them how to work with it. That part I didn't really like.
Yeah, and I feel as though what really could have happened was simply having more discussions of saying, these individuals are capable. I am not equipped to be the person to, in essence, help them recalibrate their entire life. How they, go about in their various spaces, and also how they may accomplish tasks to help themselves. And like all of these things where, understandably, if someone becomes blind without preparation, one, they aren't born blind, and two, it's not a slow, progression of losing sight, which we know can also happen. Understandably, it would also be shocking, it'd be traumatic, and he's also only taking care of these people for a handful of days. At this point, by the time he leaves, this experience behind him, they've only been blind for like 6 days. So also, I feel as though there could have been giving them the benefit of the doubt. Of course, it's one, traumatic. Two, the world has ended as they know it. And three, they now have one single seeing person to rely upon, and he in no way can help them and knows how to teach them, proper things while, working with their disability. I feel as though that could have been a bigger discussion, and more so him saying, I am not capable of this. I'm just the wrong person for the job, because they certainly can be capable of these things. I mean, even the mention of the blind women they specifically bus in, because they do, are from, a place where we know that they've been blind either their entire lives or for a significant part of their lives. So they are accustomed to the disability that they've been living with for however long. And of course, those are quote unquote more ideal, because they, are used to this, versus say those who are wandering the streets of London. Of course they won't know what they're doing. I just feel as though it was very kind of flippant and quick, saying, oh, they can't do anything. It's like, well, why?
Right.
Let's remember, one, they just became blind, like at this point, 3-4 days ago, and no one is there to help them process what's happening beyond you, and you were tied to 2 other blind people. Well, of course, this is like obviously not going to work. And I feel as though this scenario suggests like the incompetence of someone considering how bad of an idea this is. No one thought this was a bad idea. Like, what are we talking about here? So I think that it could have been handled better, and the kind of focus could have been on the fact that these people deserve better accommodations. And with the world designed the way it is, there was no way it was going to happen, because when civilization was up and running, people with disabilities, whether it be, visual impairments or anything else, were already not being accommodated for to the point where they should be. Now civilization's collapsed, and we got this one guy who is bad at math and only knows how to kill Triffids. I mean, obviously he can't help them. He's the worst man for the job, even though I like him as a main character and I like following him. I feel as though there could have been more conversations, like more consideration of like how these people could have flourished in other situations.
Yeah, 100%. I did find the illness interesting. And I think that, so you mentioned the 100 women that came from like the blind school. I think that will be an important detail, because at first I was like, this is kind of odd. Why did they specifically, and they kind of explained it in the sense that they got the women from the school because they already knew how to do things and they had been educated in that way. So they kind of explained it, but I think it's going to be even more important, because I don't know if you got the impression, but I think that anyone who saw the meteors is going to die then. Is that what's happening? Because like he was trying to figure out, okay, is it typhoid? No, that takes too long to incubate. What type of illness is this? Is it because of the food we've been eating, but he'd been eating the same food that everyone else had? It seemed like Coker had the same thing happen to his group of individuals as well that he was trying to take care of. So my assumption is that the meteors are causing people to have some type of indigestion issue, stomach, gut issue that causes them to eventually pass away.
Yeah, I had the same kind of inkling, because we also saw that other, I guess we'll call him a leader of a different gang. They were kind of comparing them to being gangs.
Yeah.
And he is, initially thinking about basically following the group of blind people back to, their own home, and, ransack, take everything, because he thinks that he's killed their seeing person, which is Bill, and Bill's hiding. And then someone falls and is immediately ill. We've known that they've had a few illnesses. Meanwhile, this random stranger who's been following them and obviously has sinister plans, he stops, looks at this man, and ends up shooting him. And then when he's walking away, Bill says that his like facial expression is one of like wariness and concern. And so that's when Bill's thinking, I think this is a bigger issue, that it is actually, something that all of us are noticing. And yeah, I mean, Bill is also, in a way, very easily and conveniently relieved of his job, because for the longest time in these chapters, he is saying, I want to leave. I want to figure out what's going on with Jocelyn. I can't do this. This is going to fail. And he's also grappling with the point of, oh no, I should stay. I need to take care of them. We have this very weird scene where a young woman who's just turned 18, she, propositions him in an understandable reason, because when you are desperate and feeling as though you are so dependent on this person, I kind of understood why she thought she may have to do this, but she goes in and is ready to beg him to stay, because she realizes that if he leaves, they then are, dealing with a sickness, dealing with the Triffids attacking, and not really knowing. There's just obviously the situation where they're in. They need a seeing person because of what's happened thus far, and she's willing to give him a sexual favor, if he needs it, because she's like, I want to survive. That ends up not really being a moot point. He of course says no, which is very good, because I was about to be like, Bill, you better make the right decision here. You better make the right decision. And he did. He says no, shouts for her to get out, and promises that he will stay though. He's like, I will stay, that's not necessary. And then the next day, doesn't really matter that he said he's going to stay, because everybody's dead or they ran off, and didn't believe him when he said he'd stay. So then he's like, well, I guess I'm going to go to Westminster. I guess I'm going to go find out what Jocelyn's been up to. And I agree with you that there's going to be this difference of, why is the illness not found its way to Tynsham, and it'll likely be how these people became blind, and maybe the blindness is a symptom in the lead up to the illness.
Yeah.
And yeah, like maybe even like the meteor isn't what made them blind, like by the flashes, even though it is, maybe it was, because it was like very bright, crazy flashes. But I could also be like them attributing it to the meteors as of the flashing, but in reality, it's actually a first symptom of the illness. And because he didn't see it, it didn't get into his system. I don't know.
They did talk about that whenever they're driving, and they see these cars, and none of the cars have had an accident. So they realized that the blindness did not come on immediately. It was something that came on slow enough that people were able to react as they were driving around at night. They were able to pull off to the side of the road, or at least stop their car before they hit one another. And so it does make sense that it would be a symptom rather than like directly caused by the flashing lights. I want to go back and just mention, because I really liked this line in this discussion with Bill, when the 18-year-old girl, the day after the day after she propositions herself to him, she ends up being in a sick bed as well, because she's come down with the illness, and he has a conversation with her, which is very sad. And he says at the end of that chapter that it meant something that she asked him to stay. She didn't ask him to, like, that. She didn't say, take me with you. She said, stay with us. And so it was all about the kind of community and wanting to help people, as opposed to wanting to help yourself. And then he says at the end, he's like, I didn't even know her name, which it's another mark on Bill's psyche, like him going through all these moments of these people's last breaths, like the couple in the apartment that killed themselves, and the man in the bar. Like, how many people has he seen die at this point that he doesn't even know their name, and they're going to forever mark his life?
Yeah, that's so true. I will say that she calls him Bill a couple times, and after she said it, like I think a second or third time, I was thinking, wait, do we know what her name is? Because it's never said. And then when that chapter ended with him saying that, I was like, I wondered, because I was like, I'm pretty sure we never ended up having her exchange names, even though they all knew who he was. And obviously that's also because they were dependent on him. He was the one seeing person. And maybe it speaks to the fact that he probably didn't, how many of these blind people that he was in charge of, that he had to care for, how many of their names did he actually know? Which is kind of something to reflect on his character, both his, empathy, but also lack thereof, and him kind of reflecting on these moments and asking, how could I have reacted in a scenario? Could I have been better? Could I have been worse? It probably would have been harder for him to know their names because he was already trying to distance himself. And every passing day he was with them, he said, it's harder for me to just leave them
Yeah.
because I'm realizing how important it is to like be there with them and help them and assist them. And yeah, this young woman who, again, 18 years old, he also reflects on her having like deserving the life ahead of her and it being taken away from her no matter what. It doesn't matter what her existence is. She could be living for, years and years and years. Civilization is destroyed. She shouldn't be trying to survive. She should just be enjoying the luxury of society and the safety of it. And yet that was taken away from her. And of course, she's also blind. So that's like a new, situation that she's got to deal with. And again, no supports. There is no way to help her thrive in this world with her disability. And then, yeah, then she's, very quickly slain by this illness. And even then, even with everything, she was still thinking of the group and saying, help everyone. Don't just take me with you and abandon these people. So, yeah, we've been seeing all types of people. It's kind of interesting to be in Bill's perspective because he does interact with so many people and we're seeing the spectrum, the most selfish people to the most selfless, those who, are survivors who have hope and those who have, found that they're at the end of their rope and don't believe that the world as it is for them anymore. So it is, there are many poignant moments. What's interesting is that after, this really like thoughtful end of the chapter, he returns to, the university to, regroup, see what's going on, kind of easily discovers that everyone has failed as far as this, experiment of trying to, all break up. Splitting up is never a good idea. Scooby-Doo is telling us to split up, gang. We always know that's when the monster comes out. And so we already knew that was the wrong scenario, but he returns to the university, sees this, address basically on the edge saying, hey, come here. And he's like, okay, keep that in mind, but I'm, going to collect myself, wait until morning and then I'll go. And he ends up finding a Triffid, just hanging out in the garden that he had spent his last night there with Jocelyn, shoots the Triffid, the sound goes off, and then we meet Coker, who is the man who broke everyone up in the first place and, like chained him to these two other individuals, dropped him in the middle of nowhere. And we all know how that turned out. And now Coker just kind of comes strolling up saying, yeah, I had a bad idea. That was my bad. That was my bad. And I'm like, Coker, you freaking idiot. It's so frustrating that they're just like, we win some, we lose some. And Bill's like, yeah, it's fine. And I'm like, no, it's not fine. And they're like best friends all of a sudden. I'm just like, what is happening?
Yeah. His comeback, I was like, "Oh, no. We are abandoning this man, correct? Like, we are not traveling with him. Like, why? Why?" Yeah, I was very shocked by the fact that he got to tag along. He also doesn't really learn his lesson because they end
No.
up in a new location. They travel to the country and they find, which is what the university, uh, whatever people, cult, whatever you want to call them, decided to do. They wanted to travel to the country and go to a cottage or some type of institution that had gated, things that people couldn't get in, couldn't have easy access to, and so they do find that in Tynsham. And but Coker kind of comes in guns blazing with his own opinions and causes some trouble.
Yeah, I was so annoyed by him. One, he's such a snake in the grass because we know that he is kind of a chameleon. He will change his language, change the way he acts to basically get people to agree with him. He's almost a, trained orator and he loves to give a good speech and he will adapt to those who need him to either sound well educated or less so from a certain region. And I'm just like, okay, so you're skeevy, you're gross. I already don't like that you know to do that. Yep, politician is what I'm thinking. I'm like,
It did seem very political when he was talking about it. He's like, "Yeah, you can use
seriously.
it in the right moment and get people to trust you." And I was like, "Mm, okay."
In fact, the reason why he got away with not, being there to witness the meteors is because he's hiding out from the police while like giving this oration at a rally of some sort. And I'm like, you're a man of many faces is what it is. And I don't like him. And yeah, they arrive at this community. They are strangers. It's kind of them to even let them in the door, especially after what he's done, because they were a part of that original group and hated his guts for what he did. And he starts off by mansplaining. He decides to just like swagger around and again kind of manipulates the leader. I think her name is Mrs. Durant. And he tricks her because she's ready for a fight, and he just says everything that he knows she wants to hear, and then he walks away and goes in to talk to the men, which I don't know if I like. I don't like that. He just goes like, I'm just going to talk to the men, and immediately we hear his linguistic change again to get them to all be on his favor. Don't trust him. And then he ends up getting the power on because they're working with candles. They didn't realize that there's, a generator of some sort, and he gets it on. And when a woman who's just minding her own business, she's, doing mending, she's just doing her job, he comes up and yells at her, berates her for not knowing that there may be an engine of some sort nearby to utilize. And she's just like, what are you doing? Why are you like saying? And he goes off on this random tangent about savages versus civilians. And I'm like, you're acting like a savage, my guy. Talk like a normal person and treat her like a normal person. I was like, you're the worst. And I hate that you instigated this. And then Bill gets all broy with him saying, yeah, like, she's not ready for the truth. And I'm like, you suck. I'm not impressed. I'm not impressed.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see where that goes, because it very much sounded like Coker is making himself an important figure, right? That's what it felt like to me with his engineering skills or whatever. He is making himself someone that other people can perhaps lean on a little bit for the niceties of the old world. Which is, yeah, a little worrisome. I didn't even think about him going in and talking to the men. I mean, I knew that he changed his language when he went in there, but I didn't think about that. Something that we did just kind of briefly mention that I do want to say was a disappointment of mine for this section was how little the Triffids were in the middle of the book.
Good
I feel
point.
like we did get some of it, and we got confirmation that they do have skills of listening, because Bill talks about that, the fact that they can listen to what's happening and judge where people are based on noises. But I was just a little disappointed that they weren't more a part of everything. And it's probably because they were in the cities. There's been discussions of the fact that they don't really like the streets yet because they can't feel the soil and things like that. But I don't know. I wanted more of them.
It felt as though we forgot about them for a time. We never saw them. He with all of these other things going on, them walking around the streets and things. It does feel as though the fact that this book is called The Day of the Triffids, and we only ended up having that one interaction, and that was in the property of like Josela's home. And even before that, he'd kind of seen them grouping up. I feel as though in that one day, again, that one day in that first section, we saw Triffids like a few times, a handful of times. We also learned about a lot of them. Like there was a chapter dedicated to us learning about these Triffids and how, they were domesticated and kind of controlled by society. Obviously that, was the suggestion that it's an issue. Now the society can't control them anymore. And then in this middle of the book, yes, exactly, directly in the middle of the book, we don't get them until this one scene. And they are just like, whipping their green, tentacles. They're
I was like,
they're
where is this gonna go?
I don't know. I was like, I didn't know where the sentence was going either, for being honest. I'm glad it went kind of in the right direction. And they're just like knocking them down, and they escape, and they're just like, okay, well, so we got Triffids that way, we got another gang this way. Well, here we are. And then we get distracted by the sickness again, and just kind of carry on our way. I think he says even during their drive to Tynsham, they do see a couple little groups shuffling around, and that's it.
Yeah.
So you're right. This I wanted them to be a bigger part. I'm assuming we're going to get this like catastrophic climactic scene where they're coming at him from everywhere. But yeah, I'm a little bit, dissatisfied with the fact that we haven't seen them very much in this middle section.
Yeah. I feel like the tension with that component has definitely depleted. So hopefully we see a rise and one that's gradual. I don't want something that's like we don't see them and then like the last two chapters it's like they're coming out of the woodwork. I want I want to be not prepared, but like I want there to be like an ominousness that we get throughout the rest of the book, but we'll see. Speaking of that, I know we can continue talking, but we're going to answer our 3 questions. So, what is your current rating for this section of the book? Who's your favorite character? And what questions do you have for the end of our story?
Well, my rating for the section, I would argue, is 3 stars. I didn't find it to be that engaging. Like I said, it was a bit of a slog. I was eating up, the first couple chapters of this book, and then this section, it was just a little bit slow. We were trying to figure out where the next, solidified place we would be in the narrative. And so that means probably my overall rating might be, 3.75 at the moment. It's kind of where I'm landing on for it. I have hope. I'm hoping that the ending really pays off, but I'm also okay. Where are we going? Was it just a really good premise for a book, a really good start, and it doesn't, meet the expectations of those first couple chapters? My, star character of this section, I would have to say goes to our nameless woman who unfortunately, dies, and we don't get her on page very often, but when we do, I found her powerful. And what she was willing to do, what she was willing to sacrifice in the position she was in. I can't really imagine anyone else doing anything beyond being more selfish. So I totally understood what she was doing and why she was doing it. So I'm going to dedicate the award to her for this section. And questions I have, are we going to see Jocelyn again? And if we are, is she going to be with that other faction? Because they do break off. We have the kind of religious sect who said no polygamy. We're going to, follow the Lord. And then we ended up getting, the knowledge that this group did go off and do something else. Jocelyn isn't on the property. Where is she? If she's with them, I wonder what's going on with her. Are we going to see her again? I think we will. I'm just worried about what state she's going to be in. How about you?
I pretty much have all of the same things that you do. My
Classic.
rating for this my rating for this section would definitely be a 3. I think that my overall is probably either a 3.75 or a 4. I
Mhm.
do definitely have hope that the end could push it back in the other direction. It's probably not going to be a 4.5 for me at this point because the middle, and this is such a short book that the middle is such a significant portion of the book as well. And then you stole my favorite character.
Mhm. We can share her.
I will say I do continue to enjoy Bill's perspective. I like him and his discussions of the choices that he's making and whether or not they're correct or incorrect, or is there a correct or incorrect in the situation that he's in currently. So yeah, I do continue to enjoy being in his head. And then I will add a question and say, I want to know how the Triffids wrap up. Like, I want to know, were the meteors caused by the Triffids? Did the meteors cause the mysterious illness that everyone is dying from? Or yeah, are we going to see Jocelyn again? And how do the Triffids tie into that? Like, I I feel like there's a lot to wrap up in 80 pages.
Oh, for sure. Also, are we going to find out how far in the future Bill is writing this down? Because he's recording
Oh,
this.
yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, how far is he reflecting on this from? Is this decades upon decades later? What is it? A year later, and they're like, we're gonna see if we can continue to survive. I will be interested to see, yeah, from what perspective he's actually writing this from, and how much time has actually passed since these events went down.
I swear, if him and Jocelyn end up together, like having babies, I'm not going to be happy with that with that ending.
Gosh, I'm worried. I will say I think that there is potential. Like you said, it could be a 4-star. It could be great, but I'm just like, oh, what's going to happen? I'm worried that he's going to show up to, their establishment and find her like pregnant already. But it's also, again, the thing is literally only 10 days has passed. So like if she is, I don't know. I want to know how long.
We went from 1 day to 10 days. So for all we know, the end of the chapter could be 6 months.
It really could. Isn't it? I feel like we're doing a really weirdly good job of breaking up timeline, because what are the chances that the first third of the book we were perfectly in that 1 day, and then the next chapter opened to lead us down a path for like a week. That's anyway. Well, again, we could be talking forever about this book, but we need to wrap things up. Thank you all so much for tuning in, listening to our chat. We'll be interested to hear your thoughts about this section and the book overall. We also are really hoping to see you next week when we finish the book in its entirety. So that means that we plan on finishing the book, reading the last, I think it's 4 or 5 chapters to the end. And the chapter that we are starting on for next week is "And Farther On." That does sound like there could be a time jump. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But yeah, we'll see you guys next week, and happy reading. Bye. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Not Reading for Content. Be sure to check the description for a schedule of our upcoming reads for this season. And for reminders and other updates, you can follow the podcast on Instagram at Not Reading for Content. Where else can listeners find you, Danny?
I have a booktube and an Instagram. Both can be found at danny.dabbles. What about you?
I have the same platforms. My booktube is at Leandra the TBR0, and my Instagram is at Leandra_the TBR0. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to tune in next Friday for our next episode.